Welcome to this special edition of the Solar Builder Buzz. I'm Chris Kroll, editor-in-chief of Solar Builder, and I'm here with the president of Planet PlanSets, Jeff Spies. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Chris. Good to see you.
Thanks for taking the time. You wrote a great, important article for our third quarter issue, I think, where you are calling out the conditions that are leading to what we're calling a lithium battery mess, MESS, in all caps. And I encourage everyone to read that article. It was the cover feature of the issue. But for the sake of our chat, I was hoping you could maybe just sum up your thesis as quickly as you could. And then we're going to really dive into the nuances here and maybe get into some details that weren't covered in the article itself.
Well, I guess at its core, I'm quite concerned with the situation that's developing and has several factors. Obviously, we've seen utility rates shift in the past few years in a significant way, incentivizing people to include a battery with their solar system so they can store energy during the day when rates are low, use that power in the evening when rates are high. The dilemma is that this, combined with the fact that the grid's becoming less reliable and many people want battery for backup, has caused a lot of folks to get batteries at the same time that the safety community is quite concerned about lithium battery fires and the potential dangers that they present in the residential and commercial sector. So what's been happening is the safety community has been developing new, more restrictive codes and standards that is making it more challenging for many contractors to install energy storage systems legally. At the same time, we're seeing an absolute flood of unlisted, low-cost lithium battery systems that are being promoted to homeowners to install without permit or interconnection to hook up to your home wiring system. And this is just not safe or legal. And so what we see is the trend in the industry is driving homeowners to want or need batteries, and the reaction by the safety community is driving people to hidden batteries,
Right.
that are unlisted, and oftentimes I think not something that is safe.
Yeah. And so I wanted to maybe start on that point as the safe versus kind of questionably safe batteries. A lot of this hinges on the UL 9540 listing. So to this point, UL 9540 listed batteries, they seem pretty safe, correct?
Yes, and what the statistics that we are aware of, keep in mind that a lot of this does happen anecdotally, but we are not aware of very many problems with UL 9540 listed energy storage systems. Precious few. Just to cite a statistic that I've become aware of more recently, I believe that Tesla has manufactured 680,000 Powerwall units. So there's a lot of those out there in the field, and that's been happening for 5-6 years now. Of those, there's only one that we're aware of that had been involved where there was a thermal event, if you will, in the non-battery compartment of the energy storage system. But interesting, and there's been no, that we're aware of, no cells that have gone into thermal runaway in these power walls. They have also had a number of the homes that power walls were installed in that had fires that were unrelated to the battery system. And interestingly, there doesn't seem to be any serious safety threat that was perceived after that fire ravaged the home. In some cases, the battery wasn't burnt. In other cases, it was burnt. But the perception from the anecdotal information that I've heard so far from respected colleagues in the industry is that the fuel load added by that energy storage system really wasn't any more dramatic than the fuel load presented by the lumber that's in the framing of the home. So the good news is 9540 energy storage system certification has been highly effective at validating the safety of those batteries that have gone through the process.
I think it's worth pointing out batteries that are not yet listed to 9540 doesn't mean they're not capable of being listed and being deemed as safe as those that are already listed, right?
It's a valid point. There are systems that I have seen that have been sold prior to their 9540 listing that were able to go through the process and get tested, certified to that standard. And I suspect there's probably some that don't have that capability. The dilemma is that if they haven't gone through that very important safety check, the consumer is unprotected about whether that battery meets those requirements.
Right. And so the maybe the one of the big problems that you're pointing out is that regardless of whether they could, in theory, be listed, if they're not, but if the battery is somehow being marketed or promoted as being certified in a tricky way, right? There are products that are maybe alluding to a 9540 listing by just saying, we've passed a 9540A test, being intentionally vague. How prevalent is that? Is that something that we're seeing?
A lot. We're seeing it quite a bit in recent months. And what we've seen again with this flood of unlisted batteries, often they're on wheels. They're promoted as, oh, here's a portable battery. You can, put it in your garage, wire it into your electrical service panel, which by the way, isn't legal unless it's a listed 9540 system. But essentially these batteries are often positioned as if they are legitimate and safe and listed because there's complexities in the way that the listing is structured. And I'll explain that briefly, that we have several different listings for lithium batteries or battery packs or energy storage systems, depending on what category you list to. The fundamental reality is the code requires that you have a 9540 listed energy storage system. There's only one listing that's legitimate. Some people say, oh, we've got a UL listing, but it's a 1973 battery unit listing, or they might reference that they're using cells that are listed. That's not sufficient. And the part that's quite confusing is you have two different numbers that are very similar. One is 9540. That's the important listing that the code requires. Then the other is a test that's part of 9540 called 9540A. So what really concerns me is that I'm seeing companies misrepresent the safety of their product by saying, we've got 9540, when in fact, all they have done is a single test, which is called 9540A. And just because you've completed that test does not mean you have a safe battery. In fact, that test does nothing more than observes what happens when you force the cells inside that battery pack into thermal runaway. That's all. You could go up in a fiery, flaming mess and there's no pass fail. It's just documenting what happens. So if you say, oh, we've got 9540 and you don't have the 9540 certification, you're being intentionally deceptive. And I have a hard time trusting companies that operate in that manner.
I would agree with that. So I'm wondering, though, in general, a homeowner, right, is not privy to probably anything that we're talking about right now, whether it's a good battery or bad battery or listed battery. So it's usually, I would assume, right up, it's to the contractor, right, the installer who is making these decisions, right?
Boy, good question, because yes, a contractor is part of the filtering mechanism. The contractor, if they want to stay in business for very long, and let's hope that you're getting your system from a contractor that hopes to be in business 5 years from now, but they will ideally be knowledgeable enough to select only listed batteries and install them in the proper manner. So the problem is that we are seeing homeowners go to a variety of sources, sometimes these distributors that have just started in business in the last several years. Sometimes they're buying them online from companies directly, companies that are telling them, you can take this battery on wheels that has only gotten a 9540A test, wire it to your premises wiring in your home, hook a solar system that's on your roof to it, and not permit it and not get it interconnected, an interconnection application from the utility. This is all heavily illegal. And if the homeowner does that unknowingly and their house burns down as a result, the reality is that the insurance company doesn't have to pay that claim if they've done it, if they've installed an unlisted product in a unpermitted system.
I want to keep digging into this because I just think it's pretty fascinating, the different incentives from all sides of this, because this homeowner is maybe wanting to go this route because their electricity rates are so high, maybe their solar has been devalued to the point, and they are clearly knowing that they are being incentivized by the state of California to install a battery to fix their duct curve problem, and they're right. So I don't know.
I have to just say that this is the point at which I will state something that has been brought to my attention and several times by several people in the past couple of years, is that the policy for distributed generation seems to be schizophrenic. Essentially, there's mandates that you put solar on, in some cases mandates for commercial buildings that you put storage on, at the same time that the utilities are restricting the ability to do that, and jurisdictions are also putting into place more stringent safety requirements, which is in their legal domain to do, that make it difficult to impossible to install energy storage systems. So we've got a very strange dichotomy occurring where there's entities within the state of California saying, put solar and storage into your home or into your commercial business. And there are the utilities and the building departments that are saying, not so fast.
Yeah, that was an interesting thread in your article that I kind of wanted to pull on. Was you're obviously raising a lot of concerns about the unlisted batteries and their potential safety issues, but you were also kind of pointing out that the permitting and code officials are maybe being too restrictive in a certain way. And I'm just hoping you could expand on that a little bit more, like, and square that circle. Like, how can it be both of these things exactly?
Well, I'll just give a little history in that only a few years ago, there were few restrictions or requirements when putting a battery system into a home, whether it be off-grid or grid-tied battery backup. It was quite straightforward to do it from a codes and compliance perspective. However, when we started to see things like hoverboards, if you remember those, that were catching on fire, there was a concern by many building departments, particularly those very large building departments with high population density, that, gee whiz, if we have lithium batteries catch on fire, it could be in a building with a lot of people in it and people could die. And in fact, that's occurred with unlisted e-bike batteries that are often abused, rebuilt, operated in unsafe manners. So in about 2018, there was a rush by the safety community to put into place a mandate in the International Residential and International Fire Codes, which is predominantly the most common code throughout the United States, to mandate UL 9540 listing. It was a relatively new certification at the time. And in 2021, they strengthened those requirements to put restrictions on system size, where you can put the batteries, how far apart they can be spaced, the vehicle impact protection and fire detection requirements, especially when you put batteries in the garage. And the problem is the combination of these sizing, sighting, spacing, vehicle impact, and fire detection sometimes made it difficult to impossible to put a battery in a practical location. So we've had just a rapid increase in the constraints, and some jurisdictions in these highly populated areas have put into place even more stringent requirements than the code requirements of sizing, spacing, sighting, vehicle impact protection, and fire detection. And they've put in more requirements, like you could only put it in this particular place, or it always has to be outdoors. And while that's certainly possible for certain projects, it's difficult to impossible in others. So we've got this interesting combination of incentives to use solar and storage and challenges to allow people to do it. So people are now going the route of illegal batteries.
One thing I'm confused by, as I have understood it, LFP lithium batteries, which are kind of on the rise and being promoted a lot, and replacing nickel, manganese, cobalt batteries. I always understood it as a good thing, as LFP batteries were safer and less prone to thermal runaway, and cobalt being a more toxic element. And I didn't know, is this all marketing speak that I've been duped by, or do you not see LFP batteries as generally safer for stationary energy storage systems than NMC?
The way I explain it when this question comes up is I explain that the two different chemistries, nickel, manganese, cobalt versus lithium iron phosphate, have different safety profiles. NMC is a more energy dense cell, and the presence of nickel and cobalt gives it the properties of going into thermal runaway more quickly than LFP. However, when LFP goes into thermal runaway, what it does is it expels upwards of 4 times the explosive gas of NMC. So maybe in a way, I guess, and I don't think this is necessarily a fair characterization, but this is one way I think of it. When an NMC battery goes into thermal runaway, it can, catch on fire and burn out more quickly than LFP. What LFP does is it releases all the gas, and if there's a spark, it goes kaboom. And we have seen incidents of this type occur One in Germany actually collapsed a very thick concrete block wall home. About a quarter of the home was collapsed in as a result of a 5 kilowatt hour lithium iron phosphate battery that exploded back in October of 2023. More recently, there's been a 5 kilowatt hour lithium iron phosphate battery in California that has suffered that same fate. There was one in Bahamas I'm aware of where there's lawsuits going through the federal court system because it burned down a multi-million-dollar home after the battery exploded. So there are certainly safety considerations for LFP. One other thing I'll mention, and it's an interesting analysis. When you look at lithium, nickel, manganese, cobalt energy storage systems, and there's still a number of those, the major companies, many of them use those NMC cells. So they're the same battery cells used predominantly in automobiles. We've seen, as a general rule, the 9540 listed NMC cell-based energy storage systems have had a really good safety track record. And there's only 6 or 7 companies in the world that make these cells, and they have highly controlled processes of making those. Whereas lithium iron phosphate cells are made by literally hundreds of companies, many of them that have very unregulated manufacturing processes. So if you buy an NMC cell, it's going to come from probably one of 7 companies, and the likelihood is it's going to be a solid, reliable cell. If you buy lithium iron phosphate cells, they can be super safe, but they could also be super unsafe because of the hundreds of companies that are unregulated that are making them.
Wow. Okay. That's thanks for clarifying that. That's good context of kind of for what we've been talking about to this point.
And to add a little bit more perspective, the perception amongst people in the industry is that the transition is going to go to lithium iron phosphate. That seems inevitable for no other reason that they don't include nickel and cobalt. Those are two materials that are becoming increasingly more complex to get. So I think that lithium iron phosphate, iron is very common, phosphate and lithium, so those metals and minerals are easy to access, whereas nickel and cobalt aren't. So I think we are going to see the industry transition to LFP. Let us hope that it's with LFP cells that have been validated to go into listed energy storage systems.
Yes, definitely. So I'm going to kind of go back to something we've been harping on this whole time, because I think it's important to kind of drill into, I think at least in California, this CPUC's role in some of this, right? Shouldn't they be more aware than anyone of the inherent dangers and readiness of the product market before creating this economic incentive that has shaped the demand of the market? That's what their whole thing is.
Well, I guess one might explain that by understanding that the state of California is not a monolithic entity. It has a lot of different elements to it, and some of them are promoting solar and encouraging and mandating it, and others are resisting it and preventing people from doing it. And therein lies the problem. So we've got, again, it's schizophrenic policy. The state of California doesn't have anybody at the helm that's saying we need consistent policy. There's no effort being made that I can see in the state of California to make certain that the California Building Standards Commission that regulates codes and standards, and the California State Licensing Bureau that dictates who can perform this work, and that's another issue that's cropping up, or the CPUC that regulates utilities for the investor-owned utilities and what the rates might be. All these different entities aren't talking to one another or playing well. And then you have the California Energy Commission, which has been very pro-solar. Yes, let's do all these wonderful things to prepare us for a world of electrification and to reduce our, carbon footprint. Well, again, there's no coordination at all between any of these entities. None. Zero.
What are regulators doing to ensure safe lithium battery installations?
What we've seen, in essence, is more concern by building departments, which have been helping encourage the development of new, more restrictive codes and standards. We have had a lot of confusion about how 9540 works. In fact, the Sustainable Energy Action Committee that I'm very active in working with has recently developed an explanation document as to how 9540 works, including testing for the 9540A fire testing. So you can see lithium energy storage systems in full thermal runaway in this article that you can get online. but we don't really see, any. I think that what is necessary is better education of the building officials that have these safety concerns about how the standard is structured and how to validate the energy storage system as being properly installed and being one that's legitimately listed. The dilemma is right now, building departments just don't have the resources to understand the flood of regulatory stuff that comes their way on a daily basis. And so when they are presented with a new energy storage system, it's much more comforting for them to say, gee, we don't know much about it, so we're going to impose all these really severe restrictions that we feel will absolve our safety risk. So therein lies the problem. So I think education is going to be, and I believe that what you're doing here today is part of that education process. Hopefully we'll make enough people aware of the concerns so that they can find the materials that will help these building departments understand how to validate a safe battery. And there is some fairly straightforward guidelines that one can stick to in that process.
Yes, definitely. I hope so, because I come back to the mindset of the California homeowner a lot in this equation. My electric bill is going through the roof. I've experienced more blackouts the last few years than maybe any other time in my life. Okay. And it just seems like the state itself is pushing me to get a battery almost purely for some economic equation that benefits them, right? So if I'm going to buy this battery, I'm maybe already kind of annoyed with the general state of things, right? And the powers that be setting this playing field up for the situation that I'm in. I'm not sure that I would care about their red tape and their extra fees on top of this, when I'm trying to find and install this battery that I feel like they've kind of like made me get. If at that point I might be thinking I'm going to buy the cheapest battery I can find, I'm going to plug it in and kind of like screw everyone and their rules at this point, right? Like, I don't know.
Well, you hit on a few topics. One is buy the cheapest battery. I'm going to come back to that one in just a moment, but there certainly are this flood of issues that are bringing people to energy storage systems. One that's really important is we're seeing more people buy electric vehicles and electrify their homes. They're getting rid of gas water heaters. They're getting rid of other gas appliances in their home, gas ranges and ovens, and they're going to electric. So the demand for electricity for residential applications, the demand for electricity for automobiles is skyrocketing, and utilities have dramatically underestimated how much energy they're going to need in the coming years. So, and at the same time, they have devalued solar distributed generation and made it difficult to put batteries on. So effectively, we're heading towards a perfect storm of even more power outages because of the increased demand of electricity and the inability of entities like the CPUC to help the grid tackle the significant increased demand for electricity. So I think that people don't fully grasp at this moment, in 10 years, how much more electricity we're going to need. Realize that the transportation sector consumes more power than homes and buildings. So think about that. If we went to trucks and automobiles that use electricity, we've got to double the grid in the next 10 to 20 years when it took us 100 years to get to where we're at today. Think about that. And it takes 10 years for transmission corridors to get permitted and approved and built. So you can't build the grid quick enough to solve the massive increase in electrical demand that's coming in the next 10 years. You need distributed generation. You need rooftop solar. You need batteries in homes. And we are constraining people from being able to do that. So people are going, I'll buy something cheap. I'll put it in my garage. I won't tell anybody. And I'll tell you what, buying something cheap, I don't think that I look at it this way. The most dangerous appliance in your home today probably is your stove, your stovetop. That's where most fires in a home, or not, maybe not most, but that's the number one cause of home fires. Number two most dangerous appliance when done improperly, in my opinion, would be a lithium battery system, because when lithium batteries go bad, they go bad quick and in a ferocious, scary manner. So at the very least, put them in a safe place. And cheap batteries, while I respect people that have limited budgets, I really do, There are certain things that you ought not to have price as your primary motivating factor. Those that bought a Yugo automobile in the 1980s probably learned that lesson in a very painful financial way, where they got a car that lasted them 2 years. Might have been cheap, but 2 years made it a really expensive car.
Right. Well, and I totally agree. I don't know. There's just kind of like this, a rational way of actually talking yourself into that cheap battery just to solve your economic problem.
So let's talk about two types of cheap batteries. Let's talk about legal cheap batteries and illegal cheap batteries.
Please.
I think that most people that are trying to do it in the least expensive way are buying illegal cheap batteries. And obviously, if a safety issue occurs, you could be unprotected from a homeowner's insurance perspective, a liability perspective. And these cheap batteries, we've seen already the inexpensive stuff on the market. Many of them turn into useless bricks within a year or two. They are non-functional. Oftentimes, you might have them working with an inverter where the inverter firmware changes, or possibly the battery firmware might be upgraded. And now if there's an incompatibility where the two systems aren't speaking to one another and they don't work together, what do you do with a battery that stops working? And then you try to get support from these consumer grade battery companies. It's non-existent. They may have a support hotline. They may have a frequently asked questions section on their website, but I can assure you that so far what we've seen when people have had problems with these batteries, they're out of luck. They've just got a few $1,000s worth of useless lithium brick that they now have to dispose of. How do you do that? Now let's talk about the legal cheap batteries. You can buy inexpensive batteries that are listed to 9540, but I will reiterate, I consider it an issue of price versus cost. A lot of people buy low price. I like to focus on low cost over the life of the system. And the number of years that it lasts is a huge impact on your overall cost of ownership. And I think what most people care about 5 or 10 years down the road isn't that cheap initial purchase price. It's the low cost of operation over the course of the ideally 10 years or more that battery would serve you.
The playing field is being so set by utilities and regulators and these large entities, right? And the importance of this for, as you've stated, whether people realize it or not, the future of the grid and meeting the demands of more and more energy and electricity that's going to be needed. We're going to need home batteries. We're going to need a lot of them. And to me, it just feels like the regulators and utilities have a responsibility to go above and beyond to avoid the situation that we're talking about, of leaving it up to not just homeowners, but even contractors to kind of figure this out and do things the right way. Like, I feel like there has to be even more incentives, rebates to make sure UL listed systems get installed, that they get installed and permitted fast. And there needs to be a playing field that's set up for success to do this the right way. And so we don't have bricks and everything, because they're important. They're not they're telling you they're important. So, act like it's important is like what I keep thinking about. Like, make it so people are doing this right. I don't know.
Well, I certainly am a big believer in doing things right and bringing the greatest value to the end customer over the long term. That's my guiding mantra in the work that I do on a daily basis and in my personal life. It's part of the reason why I'm so active in volunteering with different organizations that are trying to improve the situation, such as the California Solar and Storage Association, where I chair the Codes and Standards Committee, and that trade organization is heavily engaged in trying to find resolutions to these problems. I also am involved with the Sustainable Energy Action Committee that's developing informational guidelines for building departments about how to understand the codes and standards for the purpose of permitting and inspecting solar and storage systems. So there are some organizations out there that are attempting to address these problems. The challenge is that these are largely volunteer efforts, or in the case of California Solar and Storage Association, which is the industry's second largest trade organization, it's still not a robustly funded organization that has unlimited resources to really tackle these problems. So we rely on people like me, unpaid volunteers, that do it because I care about the future of the industry. I care about efficiency and environmental responsibility and sustainability. These are really important considerations to me, and I feel that more of the industry needs to absorb these concerns and help pitch into a resolution. The fact is that we need these manufacturers to get involved. We need building departments to get involved. We need everybody to come together because, quite honestly, it is not being facilitated at the highest levels of government in any way, shape, or form that I see.
Well said. And then bringing things back to our audience here of the solar installers themselves, whose entire business model in California was based off of like certain, net metering incentives, now really have to navigate everything we're talking about. And you can also maybe touch on the debate about who should be installing these storage systems in the first place, right? And how to get certified for that. But whoever they are also on the privilege of being on the hook for anything that goes wrong with these systems.
Well, first and foremost, the who's legally able to install solar or storage or anything is a function of the states. The states regulate that. In California, it would be the California State Licensing Board that establishes the scope of work for licensed contractors and what they're capable of doing. And you still have it legally available to have homeowners do their own owner-builder installation. But the regulations do vary by jurisdiction, and the California State Licensing Board in the past several years has been less friendly towards the solar industry. Essentially, they want to disallow solar installers from being able to install energy storage systems, even though they've been doing so safely for 40 years. And they are saying, oh, you can only have a licensed electrical contractor using certified electricians do the installation of the battery system. And I think that if you have certified electricians doing installation of battery systems, and if they're properly trained, many aren't, but if they're properly trained in how to deal with that specific manufacturer's product, that's wonderful. At the same time, we've seen C46 solar contractors safely installing battery systems for 40 years without a problem. And the California California State Licensing Board, despite this incredible safety track record, has still decided to disallow solar installers from installing battery systems above a certain limit, which seems hard to justify with the 40 years of documented safety that the industry has racked up. So we have that's another front in the battle that I hope contractors and manufacturers start to take seriously. And it's not just storage companies that should be concerned about this. It's also the people that make the solar inverters and the modules and the racking systems that go on rooftop solar. If we can't get energy storage installed effectively, they won't be able to sell their products. And one other thing I'll mention is that there is a shortage of certified electricians already. So if you disallow solar contractors who've done 90 some odd % of all the energy storage installations in California's history, if you disallow them, essentially you're going to be restraining dramatically the workforce of people who are legally able to install battery systems. So there are a whole bunch of problems, from utility rates to who can install this stuff legally to the certifications and the codes. And holy moly, it's complex, Chris. And I feel in the end, what we need is awareness. And hopefully this message that we're putting out today will build the awareness amongst people in the industry, amongst the market, so that we can try to, at grassroots level, come together and solve the problems that our leaders are failing to address. And all I know is I'm going to keep fighting the battle at the grassroots level because it's the only thing that seems to work right now. But we do need support from manufacturers. We need support from homeowners, that they need to be vocal with their local governments and saying, hey, stop putting into place these restrictions. They need to vote against the bad utility policies. When I say vote against the bad utility policies, the CPUC is controlled by a single individual in the state of California, and that's the governor. So the next governor election that comes up in the not terribly distant future, my hope is that people recognize that energy policy is a huge issue for the state of California. Just look at your utility bill. Utility rates now are getting up to 70 plus cents a kilowatt hour in the summer, with more rate increases coming. It's not going to be long before we're going to be looking at $1 a kilowatt hour in the summer.
from the homeowner side and the contractor side, I mean, what should they be doing right now to ensure that they're installing and a safe system and doing things legally?
I wish that I had a simple answer, but here's the process that they can start investigating. Obviously, research really pays off, so do a little research. Number one, you want to make certain that that energy storage system is listed or certified to UL 9540. Full stop. If it's not listed to UL 9540, it's not legal to use in 90 some odd percent of the United States. If it does not have the UL 9540, even if it has 9540A fire testing, if it doesn't have UL 9540, it is not legal to use in 90% of the US. That's and even in places like Wisconsin that do not use the International Fire or Residential Code, they have something called the Wisconsin Building Code, and they've not introduced any restrictions for lithium batteries. If you put a battery in Wisconsin that's not 9540 listed and something happens negatively, it still puts the contractor on the hook of liability, because when that homeowner's insurance claim gets filed, the homeowner's insurance company is going to go to the contractor that did this installation and say, why didn't you install a UL 9540 listed energy storage system? That is required. Even if it's not the code, you still have a responsibility to do things in a safe manner. And if it's recognized that not having 9540 is not considered safe. So you make sure it's 9540 listed. That's the first thing. Now you've got the question of, if it is 9540 listed, how do you make sure it's going to be a battery that lasts a long time and works well? We've seen inexpensive 9540 listed batteries that don't work and they don't get any support and they turn into useless bricks within a couple of years. So that's a little bit harder of an evaluation. I'll just say that there's probably about 10 different energy storage systems that we work with regularly that we feel are good, reliable, safe systems that are going to give value over the years. About 10, I would say. That's a rough number. And that number is changing. We're seeing new ones come into the market. There's probably about 50 I'm aware of that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. And there's probably some in between there that might earn their way up into that top 10. But there's only about 10 companies that I feel responsibly that I can recommend. So be discriminating. And certainly the inexpensive options out there are attractive from a price perspective. But I would say, like in life, you get what you pay for. So if it's very inexpensive, you should be asking the question of, what possible problems might I incur by going with this very inexpensive battery? And I'm fearful that those problems could be significant for many consumers.
And so even if I install a system and it's permitted and meets my local area's code and the age, everyone gives me a thumbs up on it, and something goes wrong, that the contractor, am the one that is liable for the whole thing.
Yeah, contractors are the ones that are on the hook. They have no protection by nature of the fact that the building department approved and inspected it. It means nothing in a liability situation.
Well, Jeff, thank you for taking the time to do this deep dive, to write the article, and to really start to kind of raise the alarm bells on this situation, because there's no more important topic. And I think you said it at the start of that piece that we're referencing, that this is the what was it, the most important or the scariest?
I would say it's the most serious safety concern that's ever confronted the solar and storage industry times 10. If you were to look at the next most serious code and standard issue that related to safety, the severity of the problems were modest. Take, for example, a lot of folks have been, we're concerned about shock hazard if a firefighter's on a roof. Never has happened, to my knowledge. Never, not once. Not a single time in the history of America have we seen a firefighter shocked by a solar system when they've been fighting a fire. We've never seen, to my knowledge, serious problems occur when homes didn't have the adequate fire setback. My PV system went in before the fire setbacks, and it only had about 18 inches from the ridge to the top of the array, which then wasn't legal for a while. Now it is again. But, I've not been aware of people having solar panels on their home that are on fire and the firefighters have had problems with fighting that fire. Sometimes they might not get on roof, but usually they don't anyway. So we don't, and when there's been fires in rooftop solar, most often what we see is like a burned solar panel or 2 or 3, sometimes some burnt roofing material, and that's the extent of it. Certainly there has been a small handful of systems that have gone bad that have caused bigger fires, but it's a pretty rare occasion based upon all the problems that we've seen. But with energy storage, when a lithium battery goes bad, the consequences can be significant and they can progress very rapidly. So I do feel that this problem that we're describing here is the most serious safety challenge that our industry has ever encountered. And I hope that awareness and engagement are going to help bring solutions to the forefront, because we really need solutions sooner rather than later.
Well said, Jeff. Like I said, thanks for taking the time, for speaking on this, for getting involved in the codes and standards process, for writing the article. Thanks for taking the time.
Well, I appreciate the fact, Chris, that you're helping bring awareness to what I consider to be a very serious issue, and the fact that you were at the NABCEP conference to listen to kind of the cutting edge concerns demonstrates that Solar Builder is paying attention to the right things.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate the plug. And yeah, we're going to be staying on top of this as much as we can. And, hopefully we'll start to see a lot of progress, going forward.
Thank you, Chris. Go to the link on screen to download the Solar Builder article titled The Lithium Battery MESS to learn more about the growing risks of uncertified, unpermitted lithium energy storage systems and what you can do to protect your customers and your business from the liability posed by these illegal, cheap, and potentially dangerous batteries.